morning, Europe, and good afternoon, Asia. Hello to everybody in whichever time zone you're located currently. My name is Sebastian Bersick, and I am very pleased to welcome you all to today's Jean Monnet lecture on EU-Asia connectivity here at the Center for EU-Asia Connectivity at Ruhr University, Bochum. Today's lecture is a lecture that deals with issues which are, again, very topical, and that is because we will focus on the role of Chinese multinational enterprises in EU-Asia connectivity. That is a topic that does not only relate to economic factors, but also to non-economic ones, those all of which influence decision-making when it comes to Chinese foreign direct investments. In Europe, especially here in Germany, these questions, that is, how to react if Chinese companies want to acquire assets that are considered to be part of infrastructure assets that might even considered to be part of critical infrastructure, how to react to that. These are issues that are of extreme, have become issues of extreme interest, not only in the foreign, but also in the domestic area here in Europe. So I am particularly happy to welcome today's speaker here of the guest lecture, Professor Dr. Francesca Spigarelli, who is a full professor of applied economics at the Department of Law at University of Macerata. And she has been a vice rector for entrepreneurship and technological transfer until very recently, for more than, well, for 10 years. But she is also the director of the China Center at the University of Macerata, and her main research fields are multinational enterprises from emerging countries, and especially the Chinese economy and growth, that is, and the international strategies, internationalization strategies of enterprises. That is what she focuses on, not only with regard to her research, but also with regard to her teaching. Obviously, Professor Spigarelli, she has also on the European level been and is the Italian representative on the Permanent Working Group on Human Resources and Mobility of the European Research Area and Innovation Committee of the European Commission, and since 2017. So Professor Spigarelli is perfectly fitted to deal with these questions of Chinese, of EU-Asia connectivity with regard to Chinese, especially FDIs. And recently, during the G20 summit in Bali, there were some reports that also the new Italian government is very ready to further increase economic relations with China. And so for us, it is certainly also interesting to see and to learn some more about how the Italian government positions itself when it comes to the question of China's increasing power in the global economy, and also in global politics here in Germany. There is a new China strategy is being worked on. It has not been published yet officially. Some parts have been leaked, apparently. But so these are very, very topical questions, and I'm sure that we will have ample opportunity to discuss these. And that also goes to to you, because please make use of the Q&A feature of Zoom and pose your questions or comments to Francesca Spigarelli. She will especially focus on the role that Chinese FDI has been playing in creating linkages between the EU and Asia since the launch of the Go Global policy, the Chinese Go Global policy, 2 decades ago. And specific attention will be paid to logistics and manufacturing as key industries, as well as to the latest shift of priorities that come with the 14th five-year plan, from which covers the time span from 2021 to 2025. Francesca, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Bersick, for inviting me to have this lecture, and I'm very honored and pleased to share my research ideas and some information. And I'm very pleased to the Center for Eurasian Connectivity and the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence. So thank you so much for inviting me to have this presentation. And I'm also grateful to all participants for joining this event. I will use some slides that I'm going to share with you. So what we have today as a lecture is, as a title, is Shaping EU-Asia Connectivity and the Role of Chinese Multinational Enterprises. So I will start saying that the role of Chinese multinational has been really relevant in the last 20 years to explain the linkages that China has been building with different areas of the world and Europe specifically. So today my topic will be mostly related to the role of China and Europe. So the Go Global strategy, that is the role of Chinese multinational worldwide, has been, I would say, at the heart of the process of integration of Chinese firms globally. We have been experiencing different waves of Chinese investments around the world and in Europe particularly. And when we talk about the Go Global strategy, we must see this kind of strategy and policy totally embedded in the Chinese five-year plans. So what I find really interesting is the fact that when we talk about globalization of Chinese firms and connectivity that they are creating worldwide, this is just a part of the big picture of the big plan that China has been developing in the last 14 years. Indeed, the role of the Go Global, the role of creating connectivity worldwide through multinational, has been changing over the time, over the 20 years, with an adjustment of goals, priorities, and mode of integration, shifting from Greenfield investment to merger and acquisition, and we will see in a while going back to Greenfield more recently. And each industry has been following a different path. This is related to the fact that priorities change over the years. So we can see that the connectivity has changed and different areas of Europe has been prioritized by Chinese government as well as different industry. And when I explain in general the Go Global strategy, I always want to highlight that the China strength lies in its approach to structural change. That is, the Go Global policies is, as I told before, totally embedded in the 5-year plan approach through which China has achieved a broad structural change of its economy and society. And China has been leveraging on international cooperation in general, not only through the Go Global policy, but the first step of this international cooperation approach has been the open door policy, attracting investments in the home in the domestic market. And the use of industrial policy has been crucial in explaining this kind of structural change that China has been managing in the last 40 years, promoting different industries, promoting different areas of the world and in Europe, of course, and also different industry. And this is something, I don't have time to go deeply into this, but this is something really typical Chinese, dating back in the Confucius time and in the Confucius philosophy, this kind of approach, experimental approach, and shifting of priorities throughout a long-term approach. And if we see this graph where I represent inward and outward Chinese investments, we can see that inward FDI really boomed after the 90s, while Chinese companies started to go abroad only more recently in the last 20 years, with a really huge increase of investments starting from the formal launch of what we call Go Global policy. So first, the open door to attract capitals and fuel the Chinese economy with technical capabilities coming from abroad, with managerial competencies, with financial resources. But then in the second stage, more recently, the Go Global policy was launched. And there was a sort of booming flows of investments worldwide in different stages that we can really understand and we can really read in the better way, going through the different 5-year plans that have accompanied the expansion of Chinese investments abroad. Here I have just pasted some covers from The Economist, where China's has been depicted in a different way throughout the years, starting from the way China started to see the world in the early years of this century, with an increasing capacity of China to buy companies abroad. And here I have tried to summarize the key point of this strategy, going global, reading that strategy within the different 5-year plans that have guided China through its development at economic, social, and cultural, let's say, way. In the first launch of the Go Global, starting in 2001 with the 10th 5-year plan, here I just highlighted the key parts of in red of keywords of the plan where the Go Global strategy is described. You see that priorities in the first step of this strategy were to prepare globalization of Chinese firms, to create networks of financial support, of logistics, and promoting the first experiments of the globalization of Chinese firms that were mostly related to resource seeking, so natural resources. This is also why in Europe we got not so many investment at the beginning of the Go Global strategy, because in the first step, this strategy was aiming at securing natural resourcing and preparing the network of, let's say, support that later in a second step, the Chinese firm would have needed to expand globally. And the numbers that we see after this first plan really are impressive, because we see in the numbers what the plan was telling us. So the first year we see an an increasing number of investment in the mining sector, so primary sector. Agricultural was not so relevant, manufacturing was not so relevant, and the booming of mining is totally explainable with these priorities. And then year by year, we started to have some investment in the manufacturing, in the logistics, in the computer services. So this is just a reflection of the priorities of the plan. In the 11th five-year plan, 5 years later, we see a different level of maturity of globalization of Chinese firms, where the priority was to support a deeper globalization of Chinese companies, also through merger and acquisition that require a sort of maturity in the management of resources, in the management of the acquisition. So acquisition come at a later stage, only in the second plan that was dealing with the global strategy. But starting from this plan, also a strict risk control was promoted by the government because of the several cases of failure or difficulties of Chinese firms. And this is why we see later in the 12th five-year plan, I go a little bit quick because we don't have so much time, that priorities shift again. And we see that later in the numbers of Chinese firms going abroad in different areas of the world, because now, after 10 years from the launch of the global strategy, the priority is to rebalance FDI outward with inward FDI. So a sort of necessity of an equilibrium between amount of resources and priorities of sector welcomed in China compared to sector promoted in going out to invest all over the world, and Europe specifically in this period. We have a push of strategic asset-seeking FDI, looking for resources that China could not have access to, as, for example, well-known brands all over the world. And this is when Europe starts to become really strategic for China. Strategic assets, not only brands, but also technological capabilities, and also strategic market-seeking FDI become crucial. And these are the keywords that I have highlighted for you, where market orientation, R&D investment, manufacturing, sales, brands become priority. And the numbers that we see as a result of this plan are really astonishing, because you see that China started to become a global player, started to become one of the most important players in investing all over the world. China ranked third in this chart, and then second in 2016 among the big players able to promote investments abroad. And if we look at Europe, we see that we have an increasing number of Chinese firms in terms of numbers, not value, numbers. This is quite important, that go to Europe also to start production plant, especially in the Eastern Europe, where they could build a sort of hub to explore later in a more mature period, the continental Europe, let's say, and the most difficult countries to enter. In the 13th five-year plan, we see another shift. This is the year when Xi Jinping launches the Chinese dream of becoming, by 2050, a totally advanced economy, and an economy that was leader in technology and leader in innovation capacity. So also the Go Global strategy started to look at this specific goal in supporting in a more effective way the transition of the Chinese economy to a total mature economy, comparable to the US and other Westerner, let's say, economies. And here we see a specific attention to creating international linkages to bring Chinese production capacity also abroad. the need to gain a role in global value chains where China could capture more value than before, because China was interested at the time in playing a different role in global value chains, not only a place where to produce goods in a very competitive way, but a place where to start designing products and to create high-tech products that were really competitive. And in this period, it is also very important, this period, because there are two shifts in the priorities of the Go Global strategy. The first one is to support the Belt and Road Initiative, so the expansion of Chinese firms along that Silk Road that used to connect China with Europe many centuries ago, and to focus investments along that road to be able to create more connectivity with the end point of the Silk Road, that is Europe. And at the same time, the second aspect is a sort of less but better, less investments, less acquisitions, but more sustainable. So better integrating in the European and world market. And we can see that some years later, not so many, in the numbers, where we see, this is solidarity equal to the Belt and Road Initiative, we see in the numbers that starting from that plan, we immediately see this shift. And this is very impressive to an economist, as I am. When you examine Chinese data, you immediately see the input provided by industrial policies, because starting from 2017, we see a decline in Chinese investments in Europe, for example. This is related to the world, but also in Europe. And this is a result of this less but better policy, where sustainability of investments abroad becomes crucial. And at the same time, starting from that plan, we see a huge of investments going directly into the Belt and Road Initiative countries, not only in terms of investments in values, but also in terms of variety of sectors involved in investment in that areas, going through the Middle East and going through Asia till Europe and many countries of Europe as a priority. So it is specifically in this period that we see a surge of investment in some areas of the world and of Europe that were not touched before by the Go Global strategy. And this aspect of the Belt and Road is really crucial when we talk about connectivity, because it is just specifically starting from that period that we see a huge interest from China through the launch, also the Maritime Silk Road Initiative, for example, to accelerate investments in some kind of critical infrastructures as port facilities in EU member states. And so we see a sort of competition also among different EU member states in attracting Chinese investments, but also starting to discuss about the need to introduce regulations or restrictions on some kind of Chinese request for acquisition of stake in ports or facilities of ports. And just to give some highlight, this topic is quite complex and it would require maybe a specific lecture, but I just give you some ideas. COSCO is one of the big Chinese companies listed in Hong Kong, engaged in container terminal operation, contract manufacturing, leasing, shipping agency. It is a subsidiary of the Chinese state-owned shipping company, COSCO Shipping Group. It is a global operator. Really, it is really impressive what they achieved along 20 years of the Go Global strategy. They already started as one of the first companies to go global. I recall you that in the first 5-year plan where the Go Global policy was launched, China started to create a network to support globalization of Chinese company. Logistics was part of this network. So COSCO immediately started to develop networks abroad. And the strategy was to build a global terminal network with controlling stake that offered linkages all over Europe and the world in order to create synergies with local players to bring Chinese goods all over the world, to bring Chinese products in Europe, but also to import some components or raw material that China needed to acquire from abroad and from Europe especially. So the strategy of this multinational company was and is still to create a sort of strategic platform offering mutual benefits for all the shipping industry worldwide, connecting global routes. And the achievement that COSCO Shipping Ports company is recording all over Europe are impressive. As you can see from the numbers, this company has created a network of 37 ports worldwide, 220 berths were related to containers, and there is an handling capacity that they have built throughout the world. It is really the capacity of the big player in the market at the moment. And connection created in Europe vary from different countries of Europe. We have the big example of Greece, where this company started to invest in 2009 in the Piraeus port, and they signed a 35 years lease agreement. And now the company has totally transformed this port in Greece as a very modern hub for connecting China to Europe in a very extensive way. And in Italy also, they were able to promote the acquisition of a terminal company, a company managing one of the terminal of key ports in Italy, in the north west part of Italy, that is Genoa. And this is an example of how they managed to create an example of linkage with China that was really important to open to the Chinese investor in general the routes to the Italian market and to the market of France, Germany, Spain, or continental Europe. But beside the logistic, that is a really impressive case of creating linkages between all the Asian continent and Europe, let's go in the last part of my presentation to where we are now in terms of Chinese investments focusing only in Europe. As we have seen, starting from 2016, there has been this shift to less but better priority. And as a result, we have been experiencing a decrease of investment. This is also a combination of situation because we have been experiencing also a rising fear of some kind of interference that Chinese investment might have played in some European countries. So there is this sort of double effect. On one hand, China promoting less but better, and on the other side, Europe trying to scrutinize some kind of investment. And then the pandemic indeed stopped many investments all around the world from all nations, and also China was affected by this. We have seen a decline in 2020, but then a rise again in the last year. What is interesting here, and I will go back in a moment to this, that the light green part that are greenfield investments are increasing, and this is very, very important. If we look at this map where we see the Chinese investment cumulative value of transaction in Europe, we can see that Germany, Great Britain, Ireland, Italy, France, were all experienced by huge wave of Chinese investment. But if we look to the last year, we see that investment, particularly greenfields, were creating linkages, especially in two sectors, automotive and ICT. And in these sectors, investment went to France, Germany, and United Kingdoms that jointly accounted for 39% of total investments in Europe. So linkages in selected industries, not limited to these two, automotive and ICT, because if we look at sectors more specifically, and we go into detailed industry analysis, there is a surge of interests and linkages that are created through Chinese investments. Also in the biotech and health, this is a result of the pandemic, where the scarcity of some resources and knowledge in the healthcare domain was really evident. And so China started investing also in some critical companies in Europe dealing with R&D in the health, pharmaceutical and biotech. But also we experienced in the last year a huge attention to new energy vehicle industry, specifically looking at the battery factories. So instead of investment in traditional internal combustion engine technologies, China has been looking to this kind of technology. And so the battery factory became really interesting to Chinese investors. And in the last part of my presentation, I would like to stress the importance of two aspects. Chinese firms are still creating linkages in Europe, but they are doing it in a different way with different modes. First of all, more and more through Greenfield. In the last maybe 20 years, we experienced a surge in merger and acquisition. We have seen that M&A were prioritized also in the 11th and 12th five-year plan. Now there is a shift to Greenfield for many reasons. So Chinese companies are opening up plants or subsidiaries branch in Europe. This can be motivated by several factors. First of all, they are trying to diversify their business from the domestic market that is crowded, increasingly competitive, and they try to go overseas to find opportunities, also to roll brands out in a very interesting destination market, where Chinese brands now have their own, let's say, reputation and can be very competitive. But also Chinese companies need to integrate more into European supply chains of some specific and critical industries. For example, batteries, as we have seen. Also, they want to expand their influence into European supply chains, but they need to comply with EU regulations that are quite strict. So they need to invest in local capacity to ensure that regulation is respected. Let's think about the ICT sector, for example, where players are facing stringent local regulation, including GDPR. So user data must be stored in Europe to be able to comply with this regulation. And they need to also connect more in a more depth way with a European innovation system. So more and more we see opening up of R&D centers, R&D embedded in production plants, where Chinese companies can tap into Europe's innovation system and skilled workforce in some specific industries. And also Greenfield investment are able to less be relevant to the screening measures by national governments. So they tend to be more welcomed locally and less depend on measures developed by national government to stop some kind of investments. If they open Greenfield, they bring local jobs and they contribute to local tax revenues, so they are more welcome. The second aspect that I want to highlight is the use of venture capital investments. This is a new way you see here in the numbers where it is relevant, the number of and then the value invested from China through venture capital. This is sort of result, let's say, of policies developed in China. So numbers tell us something that was decided in the industrial plans. There is a domestic contract of EdTech, cryptocurrencies, gaming, and there were some policies against big tech giants, and so investors are pushed abroad, and through venture capital they can easily acquire stakes in companies, trying to escape somehow the scrutiny around Chinese investment in Europe. So the scrutiny is lower in case of venture capital. And also venture capital can do quick investment in sectors like robotics and medtech, also looking at startups or joint ventures created in maybe small companies also connected to the university R&D center. So it's a new way of creating linkages. So what to expect? And then I really stop my presentation. What to expect? Let's go through the 14th five-year plan that was just launched by China, where we see a totally different approach of China to the world, to the global engagement of China, with the so-called dual circulation strategy. So promoting domestic and international growth at the same time, with a different use of inward and outward FDI, really more selective, more precise, I would say. Now China is a mature leader in the going global strategy, is a mature investor. And so investment, both inward and outward, are used at the same time in a very balanced way to upgrade domestic competitiveness. And key sectors include telecommunication, high-tech sectors, education, healthcare, services industries, as for example, finance, but also culture. And this is quite relevant to me. So we see this willingness of China to become a global player in high level technology value chain, but also in new value chain, as for example, and this is my slide, I promise, in the high quality cultural products. This is quite new. So not only engaging and creating linkages with manufacturing, with the service industry, with, let's say, some finance hubs in Europe and in the world, but also looking at creating digital cultural industry that is more and more exposed to globalization, also for a sort of use of culture as a tool of diplomacy and as a tool to embrace a new transition of China, not only a leader in world manufacturing, not only a leader in technology, but also a leader in cultural industry and cultural export-based products. That is a new area to take into account. And that's all for my presentation.
Thank you very much, Francesca, for your very stimulating talk, and which also you started off by emphasizing that this all needs to be seen and is posited in a global perspective, obviously, and we have to see the issue of EU-Asia connectivity also in that global context. That is very important. And you specifically focused then on how, well, by looking at the different 5-year plans, on how Chinese economic policy making has shifted, has changed, and pointed out the major factors here and policy goals. What about the non-economic factors here? And here I'm specifically thinking not only but specifically on the 14th five-year plan, and obviously the discussion, or let's say the policy of dual circulation, and the question of well, the relationship between the system and the domestic economy. The fact that it is argued that actually a new emphasis is put on systemic resilience here, and that is because the Chinese government, the party and the party state have decided that less dependence on foreign influence is necessary, and is a key objective actually. So, for instance, less dependent on imported resources, and an increase of technological innovation and industrial modernization. This obviously is then linked to the question in how far that will result in a dependence, probably even an over-dependence of Europe on Chinese economic actions. So how to evaluate this, how to assess this?
Thank you so much for Sebastian for this question. I think this is really relevant. This is the very relevant point. When the 14th five-year plan was launched by China, the geopolitical situation was even different from the one that we have now. And I think that in that plan, we have a lot of necessity to be able domestically to produce some components and to become resilient to systemic crisis. But now this situation is even worse, when we have seen that, for example, the US has really recently launched this ban to export to China some critical components. And I would say that the geopolitical debate is even exacerbated in the last month, where China, for example, in the semiconductor industry is experiencing huge trouble. But this is not just because of China. This is a global issue. I mean, how can we use some resources that are not available in general to produce technology where China wants to have a sort of superiority compared to the US? And the dual circulation strategy is about transforming China into a sort of autarky. So an economy that relies on international linkages, but those linkages are not necessary. So they still keep open to international linkages because they are crucial, also because China wants to become a global player, not its own player. But at the same time, there is the fear that for some reason, some resources could become really not available. But it's not only about the use of resources that are rare or scarce. It is also a method to not have to rely on foreign assets in general, because in the last 40 years, China has used internationalization to attract resources, managerial competencies, capitals, has used the global strategy to strengthen, for example, its brands. Now it is a more mature stage. So as you were saying, this is something quite new, and the dual circulation strategy is now in place, but the recent events and the recent geopolitical events that we have seen really make it even more critical. So we might expect in the future that China could strengthen its measure to become even more auto-resilient, auto-sufficient, autarky oriented.
Yeah, well, thank you. This certainly points to the question when you emphasize this policy less but better. I mean, how is it measured? You know, is it and what are the criteria here that decide whether it's what makes it better? Is it the internal cycle, or is it the international cycle, so to speak, that has priority, or is it a double helix? And you said that, or you pointed out, if I understood you rightly, that decoupling actually is more probable to, or more elements of a decoupling policy are likely to materialize.
Yes.
Would you like to further elaborate on this? Or what would that mean for the role of Chinese multinationals then in Europe?
Yeah. So first of all, I think that less but better can be explained also in a double way. On one side, China started experiencing several cases of failure and several cases of rejection from the European side, mostly, but not only, also from the US, rejection of deals. So it was, let's say, a way to say we cannot go global in such an extensive way as we did in the past, also because we are experiencing more and more obstacles in integrating worldwide. But also we really must take into consideration the fact that Chinese companies sometimes were not so well ready to embrace globalization. So there were several, let's say, cases of failure because of inexperience of Chinese managers, for example, or companies that could not integrate in a very successful way in local economy. So I would say it was, on one side, the fact that China realized that they should behave as an advanced economy, that one goes abroad, is able to integrate, to settle in the local economy, and to create value. So less but better, also through a sort of risk management system. So many investments were not authorized by Beijing because they were not all they were not able to ensure a successful maybe integration in the Western market because of many gaps, managerial gaps, resource gap, or strategic asset gaps. On the other side, we have seen a surge in protectionist measures, not only in the US, but also in Europe. Let's go, we could talk about the agreements that were signed by single countries, as Italy. You were mentioning in the introduction that we might have talked a little bit about Italy. In 2017, we signed a memorandum of understanding, and President Xi Jinping visited Italy, and there was a great, let's say, event of signing this friendship. But then, after not more than 1 year, there was a total shift from welcoming Chinese investment to, let's say, stand by. Let's put a hold in several cases of acquisitions because of national interest. But not only in sectors where there is national interest, as telecommunication, for example, of energy grids, but also in industry that were not considered some months before as strategic. So there is a total shift of attitude, let's say, of behavior of some European countries toward Chinese investment. And this is also because of the decoupling of the Chinese economy and the US economy that started in that years. So 2018 and 2020, we start also the kind of rhetoric behind the leaders that was going to be really more, again, more in favor of this decoupling. Sorry, I think that I have to be quick because we have to lose so much time.
And it's a complex issue. You pointed out the Italian case. There is a growing perception in Europe that China is a systemic rival, not only a cooperation partner, a competitor, but a systemic rival on which it is wise not to overly depend, right? And we can see that on the member state level, obviously as well. Linked to that, there are a couple of questions here. One by Mr. Li Yuqiao, who's a doctoral student of mine here at Ruhr University, and he's referring to the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on investment.
I was referring to that.
Yes, so that is in a way that is linked to the surge of protectionism, right? That you that is it's stalemate. It's that in fact that it's frozen is linked to these obstacles that economic exchanges are confronted with. And so what kind of role do you expect Chinese companies and their investments to play now that we are facing this stalemate?
Yes, so I always tell my students that geopolitics is fundamental to understand the relation with China. So if you don't look at geopolitics and if you don't look at industrial plans, you will never understand what companies are doing and what European companies are doing in this moment, but in general. So I think that companies are promoting linkages anyway, even if the geopolitical situation is very complex. So less because it is very difficult, but still there is a huge interest. For example, when I talk to entrepreneurs here in Italy, they still see a huge interest in the Chinese market. Huge, because it is an extremely big market where Italian goods or European goods can be sold. And these are products maybe of high quality with a high price the Chinese consumers can afford now, and technologies that can be acquired by Chinese companies and that can be paid. So there is a huge interest. But what you were mentioning before, China is considered a systemic rival. So we have this, let's say, aspect at general level, framework at country and European level, where we see a sort of freezing of relation because of this systematic rivalry with Europe. But then if we look at business, there is a huge interest. Indeed, looking back to geopolitics, we cannot ignore the fact that the US is always there when we talk about a relation between Europe and China. So the decoupling that is trying to be developed by the US will affect many investments in Europe as well. So this is very complex, but I see that I predict that investment will go on. Relation will be maybe more selected on the more technological industries. But on the other kind of industry, manufacturing, for example, let's look at the Made in Italy sector, for example. Many companies in Italy cannot survive without selling these expensive goods to China. So there is a sort of, trade-off between looking at geopolitical issues and trying to serve business that is going in another direction.
Yes, and let us also bring in here state actors, other state actors, and that is Japan, because there is in this case Japan, because there is a further question by my colleague Maximilian Rech, and he refers to Japan and wonders in how far Japan's emphasis on quality infrastructure, and there is even an EU-Japan partnership, right, on sustainable connectivity and quality infrastructure, in how far this emphasis on the quality dimension had an impact or has an impact on the Chinese policy and its emphasis on quality instead of quantity.
Yeah, this is a very, very good question and very good point, because I think that the decoupling EU-China will never happen, but Europe wants to rebalance maybe the relation with China, and this can be done also through Japan. So this kind of partnership, reinforced partnership, is really crucial, and the quality of infrastructure is a key point. Also in the light of Belt and Road Initiative, for example, and the infrastructure that China has been creating all over the world. So the relation with Japan becomes crucial, and this is why I always say the geopolitics is key in analyzing China. And I'm sure that China will have to take into account this and look in a different way, the triangle of Europe, Japan, and China, also prioritizing relation with this Japan-Europe platform, let's say. So I totally agree, this is crucial.
Thank you. Let us move forward then. And my colleague Bernadette Andreossa O'Callaghan, hello Ireland and Boop as well. She's asking in how far these policies, that is the dual circulation, for instance, are helping to build a fortress China.
A fortress.
The fortress okay. China, are these policies enhancing protectionism on a global level?
Yeah, I think yes. It's not done directly. So the dual circulation is a sort of balance. It's very typical, very Confucianist balance, not closing opportunities, keeping, this kind of openness to the international world, but at the same time, it is really evident that in some kind of industries where China has already achieved maturity, there is not this open door as before. There is not that very welcome environment in China for foreign investors. This is done only in the critical sectors where China now still needs the support of of Westerner R&D, of Westerner knowledge. So the dual circulation, I think, will create more barrier at international level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is done on selective base, but in that selective industries, it will.
Yeah, linked to the question of impediments to economic exchange and interchange. There is a question from Shanghai here, and he is asking. He's stating that there are hardly any new foreign direct investments into China since 2020. That is, since the pandemic, and the zero COVID strategy has been implemented. So, for instance, companies like BASF are already they are expanding in the People's Republic. But new corporates and German medium-sized companies are not active here. So how do you evaluate this development?
Yeah, I think that the zero COVID policy has been impacting a lot in the opportunities of new investment to be attracted to China. I see that from also investors in Italy, and I have many entrepreneurs that tell me they want to invest. They already have the project ready, but they still face issues in obtaining a visa or authorization to send people to work there. Or if they obtain the visa, it is still very complicated with the quarantine that is really scary to a Western citizen. So I think that these investments also from Germany maybe are on hold. Indeed, it is more and more complex to live in China and to develop business through a direct investment from Europe to China. And when I talk to Italian entrepreneurs, also they tell me that in the past, for example, they used to employ Italian employees in China. And now they rely mostly on domestic people, Chinese people that they hire. Maybe it is good that they know Italian, or so they have some skills. So skilled labor, they hire skilled labor from China to be able to handle with a more and more complex business environment.
Francesca, we have come to the limits of our time budget that we have. So let me first of all say a big thank you to you having presented your thoughts, delivered your speech here, and presented your thoughts to us. Which were very, very stimulating, and we covered quite a lot of ground. And I think it is especially important to have that political economic view, the international political economy in view when we discuss economic affairs or security affairs, especially in these days where and mostly because of the war in Ukraine, security and questions of dependency and the limits of interdependence is in all of European minds and certainly across the world as well. So again, thank you. And also thank you very much to all the participants who joined this Jean Monnet lecture, and especially to those who posed questions in the chat. My apologies to those who posed them, however, they have not been taken up. But there will be further Jean Monnet lectures, and I invite you warmly to pose questions. Then again, however, the CIEC team here who worked from behind in order to make this event possible, also in technical aspects, they need to be thanked here as well, and that goes to the interns that we have here, and obviously also to Mireia Paolo.
Also from my side.
Right. Okay. So have a good day. Have a nice evening, and stay safe. Thank you and bye-bye.